I'm Danielle Kessner, and this is Paved with Good Intentions. Don't believe me? Just you wait. I don't know about anybody else, but I can totally believe it's not butter. Welcome to another episode of Paved with Good Intentions, the show that asks the difficult questions you didn't even think you cared about. I'm Danielle Kessner, as usual, and today we're going to be talking about Breaking the Bad. No, we're not going to be talking about Breaking Bad, although I could probably dedicate an entire episode to how awesome that show was. Instead, we're going to be talking about bad people, or whether or not they actually are bad people, or whether or not society just makes success something that we have to become villains to achieve. So today's episode is all about the bad guys. But first, here's a piece of random trivia. Did you know that the three-toed sloth is one of the most adorable animals on the planet? Well, sure you did. But despite being slow of foot, they have some interesting qualities. For example, the hair of the sloth may look diseased or covered in parasites, but it's actually its own ecosystem, thanks to symbiotic algae. And that attracts all kinds of non-parasitic bugs and all sorts of little things. It sure makes hugging them awkward, though. And now on to our episode, Breaking the Bad. What is one of the most popular pastimes where we choose sides in friendly competition? Well, it's sports, of course. I used to be a huge sports fan. I spent countless hours watching ESPN and analyzing everything from football to basketball, hockey to curling. Well, not curling so much, but pretty much most other sports. And I always found myself gravitating toward the good guys. That is, I liked players who had a strong character off the field as well as good talent on the field. I would root for the Walter Payton types, not just the best players in the league. Why? I have a fairly strong sense of ethics. Excellence means very little to me if that person is not a good person. They could be charitable, they could just be a good family man, somebody who doesn't get into trouble, somebody who isn't egotistical. Those are the kinds of people that I like to gravitate toward. But in recent years, my interest in sports has waned quite a bit. And part of it is that I've found other things to occupy my time. But there's something else that has made me lose interest even more, and that's the bad guys. From the moment I saw Ray Rice punch his future wife in the elevator and drag her out by her foot, I was done with sports. Since then, I have almost ignored them entirely. I like still hearing about the good guys, the stars who don't let their fame warp them into walking ego bots, but the other guys, they aren't worth my attention or my praise, no matter how good they are. The incident itself was just another example of domestic abuse in pro sports. It was shocking, but it wasn't the first such example. What really got me was the reaction when he was finally able to return to the league. So if you don't know, he won his appeal basically, and his indefinite ban was lifted and he was able to come back to football. And when he was able to come back to the league, fans welcomed him back with open arms. Fantasy owners picked him up quickly. There were even people who wore costumes to commemorate the elevator incident, And despite how sick this made me, it made me wonder. And with the way the world is going right now, I can't help but ask the question, do we root for the villains? Do we as a larger society put bad guys on top just because they give us something we want? Anyone who has ever worked for a large company in America, or even a small one, has had a crash course in capitalist ambition. Turn the page. There's nothing inherently wrong with capitalism. I actually believe competition is essential to a strong economy. But in order to get ahead in business, sometimes it requires a deal with the devil, as it were, and stepping on other people in the process. There's the image of successful people as ruthless, as cutthroat, or just downright inhuman. Now, are they actually bad people? No. But they do things that, when you analyze them from a moral or an ethical perspective, might be questionable. And business is harsh that way, especially in capitalist society. Sometimes people have to lose their jobs or get shorted in order to see the business as a whole survive. The people on the top are not the ones who are always going to feel that pinch, but they do. And it's not that they like doing these sorts of things, but it might be necessary to save the business. But above all, what makes them successful, what puts them at that level, is that they have the willingness to do this, to get their hands dirty. As a result, people have a target. They have someone to hate because, from one perspective, they are the bad guys. But there's also that reason why they're on top, is because, again, they're willing to get their hands dirty. And when we look at those people, we say, that's where I want to be. I want to be that millionaire CEO, or I want to be that superstar athlete or that movie star. We strive to be those people because we believe that being that villain that we perceive them to be makes them successful. Whether it's the CEO, celebrity, politician, whatever. Getting to the top requires work and brutal competition. And sports is as bad as it gets because the whole winning is everything mentality drives people for personal success. It's very egocentric, but the rewards from that egocentricity can be amazing. Who wouldn't step on 100 people in order to be a professional athlete making millions of dollars? Well, I wouldn't, but... And politics are just as bad, though that is a part of our culture that is intentionally about vilification. Your opponent or your rival is not just wrong. You have to paint them as ethically or morally corrupt. And more often than not, in order to get into politics at a high level, values have to be compromised. And what's more indicting than selling your beliefs for money, power, or fame? There really isn't that much else. But not all people in positions of power or fame are villains in the broadest way we can define it. But that doesn't mean they didn't fight a couple of dirty fights along the way to get to where they are. Or there's no guarantee that they don't have their own skeletons in their closet, that they don't have secrets that they've been able to keep under the radar so that people keep this wholesome image of who they are, this moral or ethical image of who they are. Just look at Bill Cosby. It isn't just about success, it's about principle, or more accurately, it's about spite. Especially now, with as much visibility as we have around the world, people are taking their personal beliefs to new lows. And one of the ways that the internet has really championed that is by making anonymity and a forum for someone to spew vitriol even against people who are trying to do the ethical or moral thing. So there's the villainy of success, and then there's the villainy of trying to be spiteful or anti-something just because you can, which is what the internet allows people to do. Take the Confederate flag debate, which is still one of the hottest debates in the country right now, despite the fact the South Carolina state voted to take down the flag, the governor signed it, and it has been since removed, but the debate is far from over. And it's baffling to me that this debate is still being had, but I'll get to that. In the wake of the Charleston shooting, people have called for the Confederate flag to be removed from public grounds. And that seems like a sensible solution because the shooter was flaunting this flag during all of his racial diatribes, and whether or not it's a matter of political correctness doesn't really matter. It's about respect for those people who are being marginalized when people flaunt that flag as a sign of racism, and especially the victims of violence. In this case, you have a violent act that was done by someone who's waving this flag with abandon. But a lot of people have pushed back against the removal of the flag out of their desire to preserve heritage. Now, true, it is a piece of history, but unless their ancestors specifically fought for the Army of Northern Virginia, more than likely it's not actually representative of their encompassing Southern history. However, one place where it was adopted as a part of Southern history was when it was adopted by groups like the KKK as a symbol of white supremacy. So there's really no arguing that fact because that's precisely what they did. And this is why, even if the flag has meaning in other ways, whether it's just rebel or it is that Southern pride, if that's what it evokes, even if it has meanings in those ways, people want to bring it down. The very suggestion of white supremacy is reason enough to consider it indecent. There really isn't any other reason to make that argument other than the potential for white supremacy is reason enough to take it down, especially in the wake of an act of terrorism. But why am I bringing this up here? Because the most ardent defenders of the flag are doing so with the knowledge that it has been used as a racist symbol. Yet they'll argue their way out of compromise on principle alone. So it isn't about being respectful, it isn't about being ethical, it's about being spiteful in the face of somebody trying to challenge something that has a tenuous and difficult heritage. But that's the way people are. Some will take that road of resistance not because it has a moral or ethical foundation. They'll take it because rather they want to be right in their own situation. And that's kind of indicative of the entire mentality of America. We're driven by a militantly egocentric culture. And that's different than individuality, because individuality is about expression and personal growth, whereas this egocentric culture that we're seeing is this unwillingness to see beyond the self and acknowledge the plight of others. Now, the real question is, why do we find ourselves gravitating toward people of questionable ethical or moral character, or to situations that strain the question of decency? There's a number of reasons why this might happen. One is the desire to seem edgy or anti-mainstream, and this has been a growing trend for decades, the idea of being countercultural. So a lot of the defenders of the Confederate flag, Rev. Ray Rice, are doing so to seem edgy because that's the way people do it these days. Or worse yet, they see it as being PC. Now, PC, I can get into that entire debate on its own, but when it comes to sympathy for the victims of terrorism, I don't think you really want to be on the wrong side of that debate, and yet here we are. Also, no one wants there to be limits. You get the censorship, you get the free speech, free expression arguments. Nobody wants to be censored. And in the digital world, one can do just that. They can go out there and just spread whatever hatred and vitriol or whatever they want to do with no consequence. And then there's the prospect that being stubborn or selfish will lead to success. Obviously, not necessarily in a debate, but if somebody is stubborn, if they're thick-headed, if they're selfish and egocentric, the idea is that, well, that's how I'm going to get ahead. There's that idea that if it worked for Brad Pitt, it could work for me. And sure, we're not all Hollywood sexy or talented athletes capable of dunking over a goalpost while hitting a home run, but work, the right connections, and a little bit of attitude, or a lot, could be key to getting that success. Or has the internet and social media uncovered the true character of mankind that has otherwise been shadowed by the real world? And here's kind of the deeper debate. The internet is becoming not only a living history, but it is one of the largest social experiments ever. Give the world a scenario and see what the results are, aka read the comment section on Yahoo. How many people defended Ray Rice? Quite a few. There was the absolutely ridiculous idea that she was threatening him as if she stood any chance whatsoever against a man who makes millions of dollars by being a muscle machine. She was never a threat to him, even if she was in his face. If he were a regular guy, like a not a famous person, no one would have defended him with such ardor. But because he has fame, and because that fame brings fans, there were plenty of people who were willing to give him a pass. And the excuses were bad, just like the one I just said, that she was threatening him. And we fight these fights because no one wants to be told what to do. We support these people because we wish we could have their influence, their money, their power, and we believe that they got there because of their attitude, because of who they are, even if that attitude is something that's deeply ingrained in their personality and will lead them to do bad things, like beating up a woman half his size. In this case, I really have no problem blaming movies because in our culture, villains have become increasingly easy to root for. Yes, most movies have happy endings, but the villains are the ones who are getting the spotlights. You have the Tyler Durtons of the world, you have the Jokers, you have the Walter White. And why is that? Because more often than not, villains are being presented with more depth than the heroes. We can relate to them, especially the ones who are just average Joes like us. And so many of us are sick of being the pawns in the game of corporate chess. So why not root for the villains when they're fighting against these people who are villains in their own right as well? And we want ours, so we idolize those who have it. And even when they show their ugly side, we support them because we've been led to believe that's how you succeed. You have to be edgy, you have to be aggressive, you have to step on the little guys, you have to ignore ethics entirely, you have to abandon morality and just be egocentric. That's how you succeed in the world. Movies have shown us that, so has the real world. Professional sports, politics, Hollywood, business. The biggest moneymakers in our culture today have all shown us this to be true. Again, that isn't to say everybody at the top is bad, because I can make general statements about sports, entertainment, politics, business, whatever, and they're not going to be 100% applicable, but there is truth in it, because we are inclined as a culture to seek personal gain no matter who we step on to get it. And as I said, that isn't necessarily a bad thing, because that's capitalism at its core. If we want to indict capitalism as a whole, then obviously it is a bad thing. But if we're going to take capitalism as the way of things, that's how we as a society function, then it's kind of necessary that there's going to be competition. But there's a difference between competition and taking it to a level that strains the ethical. Because we have to ask ourselves, how far are we willing to progress the narrative that the only way to succeed is by stepping over those who aren't strong enough to carry on, basically by moving forward and stepping on anybody who fell along the way. Just because someone is successful, putting in the work and sweat to get to where they are, doesn't mean they necessarily deserve the praise that they get. Because when they make a mistake, especially something that is morally or ethically wrong, they shouldn't get a pass. No one, whether they're famous or not, should get a pass for doing something that is morally or ethically wrong. They shouldn't be forgiven until they demonstrate that that's not who they are at their core. A celebrity who gets a DUI needs help, but that doesn't mean it's who they are. It doesn't mean that they are somebody who is going to always get a DUI. But somebody who beats their fiancé or rapes a woman, that is a deeper flaw. And that is something that fame and power are not going to quell. They're not going to quell the darker voices in their heads. In fact, fame, money, all that's going to amplify those flaws. Do we want to continue holding these people up? Do we want to continue praising these villains? Or do we want to start rooting for the heroes again? And there's no easy answer to that, because anymore it's hard to find heroes who stay that way. Shuffling papers. Thanks for watching. You can check out more Paved with Good Intentions right here on YouTube. You can also go to iTunes or Stitcher for the audio version where you get more content. Yes, because I'm vindictive like that. You can also check out any of the other videos I have posted there, anything I've favorited, because that's how YouTube works. And be sure to check out my podcast, Translation, which is found at the link below, as well as on iTunes and Stitcher. If you have any questions you'd like me to ponder on the show, or if you want me to invite you to the show, then send me an email at translationpodcast@gmail.com. I do want to hear from you, so please send me your thoughts, your reflections, your headshots. And once again, this podcast is produced sponsor-free, so thank you for supporting independent artists. I'll see you on the other side.